on stage with me now, America Ferrara. She's an award-winning actress. You all know her from Ugly Betty and from her work on film. Her new TV show is called Superstore, and she's the daughter of Honduran immigrants. Also with us is Lavinia Limon. She's the president and CEO of the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants and has been working in this field for 40 years. And Celina de Sola works to strengthen communities in El Salvador. It's through an organization that she co-founded called Glasswing International that does on-the-ground work. So thanks for being here. I actually want to start with you, Lavinia. So give us a context. We heard one story, right, of Heidi, who makes this decision. Put it in a bigger context in terms of Central America and what you know to be kind of on a daily basis, the stories.
On a daily basis. We work mainly with the children, and it's so the children who come alone, and their stories are just amazing and horrific, from being recruited to gangs, threatened by gangs, raped by gangs, having siblings killed, obviously, just in a daily violence where people won't leave their house for weeks and months on a time, and struggling to decide to make that decision. We say that kids don't leave their homes on a whim, and yet we see that last month, November, over 5,000 children crossed the border from Mexico, all of them Central Americans. The numbers are going up. There was a lull because of increased enforcement on the southern end of Mexico's border, but what's pushing these children to go is complete lawlessness and impunity by the gangs and the authorities.
So Celina, again, individual stories. Kids, don't decide to leave on a whim. So the children who you're working with, why is it that you're working so that they don't leave? But when they do come to you and say, "Me voy," what does that look like? Hold on, can you put the microphone closer to you?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
No? No.
So we work throughout Central America, and on the other side, on the ground, these kids, we're trying to provide them with opportunities. But when they leave, it's because they really have no choice. And it's not just kids, it's mothers with small children because they can't go home. Maybe it's a domestic abuse situation, but really, for us, it's a huge loss because the kids that are leaving, for us, represent brain drain. They represent the resilient kids. They represent the kids who are daring to take that horrible journey, and it tears families apart. So we really do strive to keep kids.
So America, here on this side of the border, we're hearing like, oh my God, the flood, the crisis, the this, but here we're hearing Celina say, we're looking at this and saying the very best, the strongest, the ones with the most chutzpah, are leaving. You went back to, after having never been there, to Honduras. What did you sense on the ground?
Well, I did visit Honduras, and there were moments where things really came into place. I remember visiting a vocation school with young teenagers and asking, what they wanted to do with their skills, and the majority of them said they didn't expect to be alive, so they don't think about it. And that really hit home. But I don't think I think I learned the most about this issue when I visited a relief center in Brownsville, McAllen, Texas, outside a detention center on the border. And, a big conversation that I would love to have is how do we frame this conversation as a humanitarian crisis, as a refugee crisis? The problem is it gets politicized and it all gets thrown under the wide umbrella of immigration. Well, this isn't immigration. This is people fleeing for their lives from a war-torn country. It is life or death. And no matter how much security you put at our border or at Mexico's border, when this is the only chance for survival, you're not going to stop people from leaving. And for me, I would sit at home and watch these news programs and just think to myself, if I was a mother, how bad would it have to be for me to send my children with dangerous people on a dangerous journey and may never see them again, and I don't even know if they're going to survive, but that chance is better than what they have here. And so I think it actually takes very little imagination for us to see that this isn't about immigration, this isn't about economics, this isn't about opportunity, this is life and death. And when you go to the border, which I think we should be there, I think the American Red Cross should be at the border handing out blankets when these women and their children come to the borders. You will see that when I went, what I saw was when I heard women and their children, naturally I thought, oh, I'm not a mom, so they must be older than me. They're 19, they're 20, they're 21, and they're crossing the border after months of traveling under very dangerous circumstances with infant children that they're still breastfeeding.
I think part of what you said, America, that maybe can resonate with all of us is, and I know it happens to me also, is to see ourselves in Heidi, for example. Can we see ourselves in Heidi, who was just here, who you can reach out and touch her, right? Can we see ourselves? Is that possible, Lavinia? How do we break through, again, all of the stories to actually say, ultimately, yes, this has nothing to do with immigration. This is movement out of a series of countries that we have a long history with.
Yeah, I was asked the other day about what I was doing a presentation on Syrian refugees, and they said, what more do we need to know? And I said, look in the mirror. Put yourself in their position. America's absolutely right. People don't leave and face danger because they want a new car. It doesn't happen that way. And people like their homes, just like you like your home. They like their homes, they like their communities, they like their country. They want to stay. And the thing about refugees is they are the most courageous. It's a self-selected group. Not everybody goes. Honduras used to have the highest murder rate in the world. It's now been surpassed by El Salvador. So they're in competition for that first place. And when you have those kinds of circumstances, a lot of people get killed, and the ones who really have the chutzpah, the nerve, they get up and they leave. And what we know about refugees is that wherever they end up, they do really well because, as I said, they're sort of self-selected in that way.
In other words, it's people who really are putting themselves at the front to say, yeah. I'm gonna save my life.
That's right.
When I went to Honduras, and I've traveled a lot internationally, but Honduras stuck out because within a matter of hours of being there, someone in our women's group, in our peace delegation, had been jumped. And then a woman who had been beaten by police, who was a market vendor, knew that we were in this hotel. She came to tell her story. And after she left at a press conference, she walked out, and then the police beat her up. And she came back with a black eye. These are things that, I think all of us, if we lived in Honduras, I don't know about El Salvador, but if we lived in Honduras, probably all of us, just for the work that we do right now as a journalist and actor, providing humanitarian aid, we would have to worry about how to get to work and not get shot. So, Selena, give us a context now then. So this dynamic in terms of what you're seeing in El Salvador with women and children.
Sure. Just to give you a sense also, I think it's worth mentioning, Honduras and El Salvador have the top 2 highest femicide rates in the whole world. So that also puts it into context, aside from the highest homicide rates. We have 1 in 3 pregnancies are teenage girls, products of violence, because a lot of them are 13, 14. So I think it's just worth also making note to just think about if you're walking to school and you're under threat, or when you're walking home from school as a child or a teacher, you can be extorted at any moment as a child, as a young person. And it's not to say all young people are gang members, because right now we're also stigmatizing, to a certain extent, an entire generation of young people, and not all of them are criminals and not all of them are in gangs. But I think this survival mode that our population is in Central America it's at a tipping point, and we're really desperate to change
There's
it.
something called like the business of extortion, which for us, we're like, what is that? But actually where extortion only works if you have deep, deep fear. So you have to, it's like the mafia, right? So you have to, it is the mafia. So you have to increase the level of violence. So what does that take us to a story, Selena, of something that you just heard in the last month of what that looks like?
In the last month, you know, we work in many public schools. That's our focal point. And we had one school where they were extorting, asking for money. And in one school, two of the students, one of the schools we work in, two of the students were killed from that school because they didn't want to get involved in the activities that the gang was asking them to be involved in. And the gym instructor was also killed. So we had 3 people in one school lost their lives. And this is just recently. So, you know, it's a very common thing. And that's why it's so important to give these kids hope and opportunities for them to thrive.
So America, what's your sense, you know, when you think of how these stories are covered? I mean, you work in the field of popular culture, of visual. When you're seeing these images of, in fact, the name of this panel, right, is The Other Refugees. I mean, we actually don't even have a visual for the other refugees. We don't even, except for, you know, those images of people running across the Rio or, you know, scaling a fence.
Yeah.
How do you kind of manage that in the work that you do, and how does that continue to push you to be on the ground?
Well, I think what happens is these issues get taken and they get politicized and they get run over by the media, and then they're no longer talking about it as what it is, which is a humanitarian crisis. They make it a political issue. And it's up to us to take it back. It's up to us to say, this is a refugee crisis, this is a humanitarian crisis, and really hold our elected officials accountable. And we have an opportunity in 2016 to do that, to elect and pay attention and elect and hold these politicians to task who are not only not doing anything about it, but who are also blocking any progress towards treating these people with the most common decency. And it's not just about once they get here and letting them in. We have the power, us, to get up, go to a detention center and bring a coat if that's what you can do. These women and children need legal services. If they go to trial, they have, without a lawyer, they have 7% chance of staying in this country. With a lawyer, they have 70% chance of staying in this country. So if you are a lawyer, give up your time. Go represent these people who need a voice. You know, they need places to stay. They're absolutely traumatized. These women often are raped, beaten on their way into this country, and then we put them in detention centers like Heidi said, and there's more trauma and more abuse. So they need medical attention, they need psychological attention. Children need to be reminded that they're children. Sister Norma, who was the Catholic nun who was running the relief center, was the only one to gain access to the detention center where they were holding these minors. And she brought them books, and she wasn't allowed to leave them for the kids because they were being treated like criminals. We are criminalizing children who are escaping death. And that is what we need to keep talking about and keep framing the issue as that, and not allowing politicians to make it about something else.
And so now we have news that that they might be opening several new detention centers for children.
Yeah.
And I get stuck on that because I've been in the detention centers, and they're actually, I mean, I've been in a lot of prisons, but the detention centers have something very particular that's going on in terms of how people are held and the conditions. But they're asking for more detention centers for children. So Lavinia, give a sense of what's happening now. There are reports that the numbers of children, again, this very sanitized term, unaccompanied minors, child refugees, who are coming from Central America is on the uptick. There's, even the United Nations said there's a crisis looming. So what are we looking at in terms of the next several months perhaps? And reveal what you know, which is how Mexico has played a part in the fact that there have been lower numbers in the past.
Right. Well, after the summer 14, where it was all over the news, and what happened is The children, unaccompanied minors who come, not the women with families, which were put in detention centers, the children are actually put in what they call shelters run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement from the Department of Health and Human Services. Those shelters range from really nice places I've been to sort of semi-prison type places. But they ran out of space, and so the children were being backed up into the Border Patrol facilities. And those were the pictures that you saw with kids in jails, sleeping head to toe. And so the biggest fear of this administration, and always of every administration, is uncontrolled borders, uncontrolled migration. They look incompetent, right? So it made them look incompetent. And so right now they've ordered the opening of 2 more shelters in Texas and 1 in California because they see the kids coming and they don't want to be left without beds. The problem with this is the kids stay on average like 2 to 3 weeks in these shelters. And then they're released to someone that they identify, oh, this is my mother, this is my uncle, this is my neighbor. And they're sent to these places usually without any investigation of who these people actually are. We've had children who were trafficked into forced labor. We've had children who've committed suicide after staying with some uncle and who knows what was going on. It's really ugly, so we're not taking care of the children in any way whatsoever.
And Mexico's, in some way, Mexico has become a holding pen,
Yeah.
right? So that Mexico, with money from the United States, is now helping to detain the children, and more children and women are deported from Mexico now to Central
Right,
America than they
right.
are from the United States.
And as you say, Maria, these children are the ones who are the brave ones, the ones who are brave enough to get out and do something about it. When we send them back, often their only opportunity at that point is to join the gangs. And so if we don't find a way to give assistance to the kids who want to get out and not, lend their lives to the deterioration of their countries, we're just feeding back to these criminals, these kids who don't have a choice but to get involved with the terrorism and with the crime.
So let's talk about visuals as we wrap up right now. And I'm just taking an extra 2 minutes because there was a mic problem at the top, so I'm going to rob 2 minutes because that was a technical difficulty we had nothing to do with. I want to show you this picture, Aylan Kurdi. This horrific photograph, whose body washed ashore in Turkey after the boat capsized. We don't want to talk about him as an unaccompanied minor or something very, hands off. This is a child who has died. It hit us in the heart, it went viral. But then this is a photograph of a 15-year-old girl named Marcela who lived in San Salvador. She was shot walking down the street with her sister. The gang members shot her twice in the head, killing her instantly. We are at a point where now, what is the value of life, right? But to me, just as we wrap up, I wonder about what is the value and what do we represent as this country when we hear about all of the fear that exists and the closing of borders. And before we leave, and just we can kind of wrap up from everybody, 12 Syrian refugees were set to arrive in Texas just yesterday. State officials had fought for weeks to stop them from coming, saying that they posed a security risk, but the state withdrew its request. Yesterday, Donald Trump said he wants to put a bar on all Muslims entering the country. That would include American citizen Muslims from returning home. Lavinia, let's start you off, and then we'll end with each of you making a comment on that. How does this atmosphere, this generalized atmosphere, really hamper the work that you're doing, and what would be the big takeaway for this audience in terms of changing the narrative?
This atmosphere is unlike anything I've seen in 40 years. The attacks on refugees by politicians for votes is just outrageous, and they're the most vulnerable people in the world. I understand that the Americans and other people are scared, and there are precautions we need to take, but vilifying refugees and Muslims and anybody else is just ridiculous. We get so many threatening phone calls these days, and offices around the country who help refugees and immigrants are threatened. And I was thinking that when you were talking earlier, for the woman who worked in her community against gangs, and she was threatened. And it's like, are we going there too?
Wow. Selena.
You know, it's interesting how this country,
Exacto.
is it working? This country represents hope, and for so many people, hope and a second chance, and this demonization of people in a country that was founded on immigrants is, I'm from El Salvador, and it's shocking to me, and I hope that we can remember to look in the mirror and remember that each of us can be that person and could be that person that's just trying to be okay, just trying to survive and make a better life for them and their families.
America, I finally, you're making a choice by being here, by speaking up. I was saying yesterday to the women on our panel, I said, I'm sure America has a lot of people, including maybe some of, her agents and managers who are like, don't talk about that stuff. You do. And everybody here can also do something. So why? Why for you and why for them?
Well, I have to say, on a very personal note, I wake up most mornings these days and I feel depressed and sad and hopeless some mornings and paralyzed at what we're seeing. Yes, of the violence and how that's encroaching closer and closer in our society, not just terrorism, but extremists of all kinds attacking our rights. What depresses me is to see silence in the face of such hatred and bigotry and fear-mongering. We have to not fall prey to the fear-mongering. We have to decide who we are as Americans and what we are going to stand for. And it's not enough to sit by and watch people say ridiculous things and talk about it in our living rooms. We have to use whatever platform that is given to us to say what needs to be said and to stand up against the deterioration of what this country is meant to stand for. And so I get sad, and then I get angry, and then I have to go out and say something. And so I hope that the people in this room, if you're in this room, it's because you have resources at your disposal. We all have something we can do. We can all take part. We can all use our voices, and we can't be defeated by fear.
I guess it means getting out of our comfort zone and being okay with that, even if it makes us a little afraid. I want to thank the panelists, America, Lavinia, Selena, for being with us and for a great conference. Thank you so much.